Chapter 7 Competitive Factors. In this chapter, we have 6 topics to discuss, and in this class, we focus on the first 3 topics. Firstly, we introduce what is competitive factors, and then followed by discussing on the competitive advantage. And the last part of this class is to share with you what is the Porter's 5 forces analysis. So let's begin with the introduction. Competitive factors are the skills and capabilities that differentiate a firm from its competitors. In other words, when a company or an organization to compete with others, what's the unique point of the customer needs to buy the products or services from this company? So any advantage or any edge of the products or services over the others, here is the competitive advantage for the firm to differentiate from the market. As a prerequisite to any strategic planning, these competitive factors must first be identified and evaluated as to their relative importance to achieving a firm's strategic goals. So from the strategic planning point of view, the competitive factors is very important, and they must be first be identified and evaluated. So the strategic planner can understand what's the competitive factors of a company and decide how to plan of its strategy to achieve the goals in future. And it is worth to note that competitive factors are complements to pastel analysis. In our another classes, we talk about pastel analysis, including those 6 external factors affecting business decision making from the environment or from the business conditions. And here we talk about competitive factors. These factors are complements to pastel analysis. So you cannot just do the competitive factors without concerning the pastel analysis. You cannot do it. And next, we move on to discuss about the competitive advantage. When we perform a firm's external analysis, part of it will involve assessing the degree and sources of competition within the company, within the industry. And this will be analyzed in 3 steps. First, the main competitive forces in an industry. So for our first step is to understand or analyzing the competitive forces in an industry, whether it is very competitive or not very competitive, or even no competitive in the market. And next, the next step is we analyze the different ways of a firm can achieve a competitive advantage. So it goes to another level that we understand the background, and then we move on to see how can a firm to achieve a competitive advantage. And the last step is to see how different activities and departments within the firm contribute to its competitiveness. So in the third step, we need to think or to analyze what's the activities or what's the strength of a company or a firm can contribute to competitiveness in order to achieve the strategic goal. So now we go to the model, the Porter's 5 forces analysis. As the first step of the analysis is to identify main competitive forces in an industry. So right now we would like to introduce the Porter's 5 forces analysis for you to achieve or to perform the first step to understand what are the competitive advantages of a company or an organization. And we would like to use Porter's 5 forces analysis to do it. Though we have pastel analysis, helps to identify whether and why certain markets will be expected to grow in the future. However, just because a market is growing, it does not follow that it is possible to make money in it. Because for pastel analysis, you identify what are the market situations or what are the market environments. Maybe you can spot out any opportunities, but even though you identify the market is growing through the pastel analysis, but for yourself, for your organization, is it possible for you to make money from it because just the market is growing? The answer is no, because you have to do an analysis of how competitive of the market, even though it is growing. And from the Porter's 5 forces approach, it looks in detail at the firm's competitive environment by analyzing 5 key areas or forces. So here we will focus on 5 forces. Together, these forces determine the overall profit potential of the industry. So you can base on these 5 forces to determine whether the market or this industry is profitable for a company to go into it. The 5 forces, namely, first, competitive rivalry. Second, threat of entry. And then threat of substitute products. And about the customers, whether they have the power or the bargaining power in negotiating with us, for example. And the last forces is the bargaining power of suppliers. So here is the chart showing the relationship between different forces in the Porter's 5 forces analysis. We can see the suppliers, potential entrants, buyers, substitutes. All these forces are pushing to the center, which is the industry the competitors. So here, like rivalry among existing firms, and threat of new entrants, bargaining power of buyers, bargaining power of suppliers, and also the threat of substitute products or services. So here is the relationship chart showing Porter's 5 forces among all these 5 forces. So now we would like to see how to determine whether the forces are high or low. So first, we would like to see about the industry competitors or the rivalry among existing firms. That in the central part of the chart here. So how to determine whether the industry or whether it's competitive or not competitive? Okay, we have some clues here to show you, and you can think about it. First, whether the competitors are of similar size. So here we talk about whether the strength of your competitor. If they are more or less the same, then you can imagine if or many competitors in an industry with more or less the same size or more or less the size, you can imagine it's quite competitive. But if the number of players in the market or in an industry are just dominated by 3 or 4 similar size competitors, and for the others, very small or even no other players, then you can imagine under this scenario, only dominated by a few large companies, the rivalry is less intense as compared to the others. So here is about the competitor size. And next is about the growth in the market. So when the market is expanding, the competitiveness of this industry or market is not that strong. But if it is growing very slow, then the competition will be a bit severe. And fixed cost or investment, if there's a high fixed cost involved and there's price wars to maintain a turnover. First, high fixed cost. If the cost is quite high, the fixed cost is quite high, the company will need to cut prices to marginal cost levels to protect the volume. So there's a price wars to maintain the turnover, and it can help to drive weaker competitors out of the market. The last point about the rivalry is about the product differentiation. If your product is unique, so the buyers is quite hard to switch to other supplier because your product is unique. But if there's no uniqueness and lack of differentiation of the products, the buyers can easily switch to the other suppliers because they can find they can just look for the cheaper one. Then the competition will be keen in this case. And next is about the entry barriers. So which barriers? We have different types of barriers. We will name it. And to what extent do they limit entry? Are we trying to get in or keep others out? These are the questions. And here are the barriers, like economies of scale. Where the industry is one where unit cost declines significantly as volume increases, such that a new entrant will be unable to start on a comparable cost basis. So that means if an industry have a very high startup cost, and once the volume increased significantly, the fixed cost per unit of production or volume will be decreased as well. So for any new entrants, they have to get the volume first. Otherwise, they cannot compete with you because on average cost base, you are much superior to them. So here is about the economies of scale for the threat of entry. If your industry has high or capital requirements, then you could enjoy the economies of scale. So it goes to the point number 2, the capital requirements. And where the industry requires a heavy initial investment, as I mentioned. So once the heavy initial investment required, and then you need the volume to fill up all the invested capital, like for the factory, you have the cost advantage over the long run because you have the volume already. But it's not favorable to the new entrants because they have to suffer initially, especially when the volume is not picking up. So if there's a high or capital requirements or heavy capital requirements at the beginning, then the barriers to entry is considered to be high. And access to distribution is about how to sell your products. And if the access to distribution channels is restricted, for example, it's dominated by few players in the market, and it is quite difficult for the new joiner on this industry to compete with the existing players. So access to distribution is also a barrier to any new joiner in the market. And next is about the patent government policy. If you have the patents to produce your goods, or there's a government restriction under this policy, then it is also a barrier for new entrants to go into the market. And the final point is about the reactions of existing firms. If there are already few big players in the industry, any new joiner or entrants or any new entrants they cannot easily compete with the existing players, because for those large companies in the market, they have been in the market for some years already, and they will do a lot of price cut or any other ways try to kick any new entrants out. But if the existing players are small players, no one of them shares a significant amount of the market share, then it is another story. Okay, because any existing firms, they have no economies of scale, they cannot cut the price significantly to kick the competitors out. So under this case, the barriers to entry is quite low, because there's no dominant player in the market. And next, we will talk about the substitution threats. The substitution threat here. To what extent is there a danger? Can it be minimized by differentiation or low cost? Because across industries or within an industry, the threat of substitute exists. And substitutes limit the potential returns by placing a ceiling on the price which firms in the industry can profitably charge. So, in other words, if your products have substitute and quite easily be replaced because there's no differentiation, then the industry or the market can be said is quite competitive. One example is like the rail travel. It looks like the rail travel is no competitor because the rail is very unique. However, for rail travel, it's also competing with bus travel, with private car travel as well. So the competitiveness is not within the industry, it's across in different industries. For an example about within the industry, it's like the milk product. Okay, because like you have the long life milk, you have the fresh milk, they are compete with each other, and if the fresh milk price dropped, then it will affect the long life milk sales volume as well, because they are substitute with each other. So next, about the buyer's power or the customer power. Powerful customers can force price cuts or to ask for quality improvements. Either way, margins are eroded. So the bargaining power is high. When we look at the factors below here, the buyer's power, say concentration of buyers, it means that small group of buyers dominate the market purchasing, and they have the influence about the price. So for under this situation, the buyers have strong power as relative to the supplier. And next is the alternative sources of supply exist. That means the buyers can find any other sources of supply instead of just go for you. So they have stronger negotiation power as well. And third is about the cost of purchase is high proportion of total cost. Where a buyer's purchase are a high proportion of supplier's total business, or represent a high proportion of total trade in that market, so a high proportion of total cost, that's the buyer's power is considered to be high, because there's maybe only few buyers can afford such high proportion of total cost in the market. It's not easy for others come in and fight with them. And next, about the threat of backwards integration, and buyers can acquire the suppliers as well. So if there's a trend or there's an integration process or trend in the market, there's a threat of backwards integration, means the buyer's power is quite strong. They can acquire any suppliers in order to dominate the market. So under this situation, buyer supply is high, buyer's power is high, and no switching cost. From the buyer's point of view, they are looking for cheap products to supply to them, and if it is not significant for them to switch from one supplier to another, it's quite easy for them to switch because of the price. Okay, if they find the price of another supplier is lower than you, then they will switch to another because the cost is very low. If buyers have no profits, it means the market is not very attractive for any new buyers to join in. So buyers have no profits that they can buy from you, but not many other buyers would like buy from you because of no profits of the industry. And the last point here, that explaining why buyer's power is high, because if the buyers have full information, so it's very transparent. You cannot say set a high price and sell to the buyers, because they know well about your products and about your product pricing in the market as well. And the final forces under Porter's 5 forces analysis is about supplier's power. And here there are the points, 6 points we put here is to highlight why the supplier's power is high. First, few suppliers. That means you have no other choices, only few, maybe 2 or 3 that you can choose from. So they have strong power or negotiation power. And next is few substitutes. That means you cannot find substitute for your supply for your materials provided by your suppliers. So you have few substitutes, you have to pay higher price, even they charge it you think unreasonable. And next, switching costs are high. So here, if you are purchasing materials from your supplier, and it's quite hard for you to switch to another, maybe due to a logistic issue, maybe government issue or any other issues, you have to incur a lot of cost if you switch from one supplier to another. That you don't want to switch it because you have to pay for it. And under this situation, the supplier's power is high. And the fourth point here is about the possibility of integration or integrating forward. That means supplier can buy or can acquire its customer. So if there's a possibility of doing that, then the supplier's power is considered to be high. And if a customer or 1 or 2 customers is not significant, that means the customer has no negotiation power in front of suppliers. In this case, suppliers is relatively strong in the price negotiation. And the final point supporting high supplier's power is the supplier's product differentiate. That means you have to go into one particular supplier because the goods or products supplied is unique. You cannot find it, or you cannot find any alternatives. So you have to pay so-called a premium price to the supplier in order to get the goods from it. So here we talk about the Porter's 5 forces analysis based on this chart, and for each element we highlight how to determine whether it is powerful, like suppliers or buyers, or not so powerful. And here is the question. This question is asking, low industry profitability is a barrier to entry. So is this statement true or false? And remember here we talk about the barriers to entry. We have highlighted five elements under these forces, barriers to entry. So you think whether profitability is included in these elements, barriers to entry. We talk about the scale, we talk about the capital requirements, we talk about the access to distribution, we talk about patents and reactions of existing firms. The consequence maybe is profits, but here we talk about not the consequence, is the cause of the courses on barriers to entry, we talk about these 5 elements. You can see whether it include profits or not. Okay, I hope my explanation can help you to answer this question.